The text arrives at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. 3 words that every man dreads but somehow expects. We need to talk. By Thursday afternoon, she's moved out. By the following Monday, her Instagram stories feature a new man's hands, a new restaurant you've never been to, and a smile that looks suspiciously like the one she used to give you during your first month together. You sit there, staring at the screen, trying to solve a mathematical equation that doesn't add up. How does someone go from "I love you" to "it's complicated" to "meet my boyfriend" in less than 2 weeks? How does a woman who claimed she needed time to find herself immediately find herself in someone else's arms? The timeline is too perfect, too seamless, too obviously planned. This wasn't a spontaneous decision followed by a lucky encounter. This was a strategic transition orchestrated with the precision of a military operation. She didn't break up with you and then meet someone new. She met someone new and then broke up with you. You know this man. Maybe you are this man. The guy who thought he was in a committed relationship while his girlfriend was interviewing replacements. The man who believed her when she said she needed space, only to discover she needed space for someone else. The person who got dumped by someone who was already emotionally, and possibly physically, involved with his successor. Today I'm going to explain the brutal psychology behind why women seamlessly transition from relationship to relationship with gaps so small they could be measured in hours rather than months. Because understanding this pattern isn't about developing cynicism toward women, it's about understanding the strategic logic that drives behavior you've been taking personally when it was never personal to begin with. Here's the first key to understanding female relationship patterns. Women approach relationships the way ambitious professionals approach careers. They don't quit one position until they've secured another one. They don't end one arrangement until they've negotiated a better arrangement. They don't burn bridges until they've built new ones. This isn't emotional instability or moral bankruptcy. It's strategic thinking applied to romantic life. Just as no rational person would quit their job without having another offer in hand, no strategic woman ends a relationship without having another option lined up. The stakes are too high, the uncertainty too great, the potential consequences too severe. Think about how career changes actually work in the professional world. You don't wake up one morning, walk into your boss's office, and announce you're leaving with no plan for what comes next. You conduct secret interviews, negotiate better packages, and secure firm offers before you give notice. The transition appears sudden to your current employer, but it was months in the making. Women apply identical logic to relationships. The breakup conversation that blindsides you was preceded by weeks or months of background research, exploratory conversations, and preliminary negotiations with potential alternatives. By the time she says, "we need to talk," she's already conducted her due diligence on your replacement. This career change mentality explains why the timeline always feels impossible from your perspective. You're thinking in terms of emotional processing time, how long it takes to fall out of love with one person and into love with another. She's thinking in terms of strategic planning time, how long it takes to identify better opportunities and position herself to capitalize on them. The gap between relationships isn't about emotional recovery or personal growth. It's about contract negotiation and onboarding processes. She's not taking time to heal from the previous relationship. She's taking time to establish the terms and conditions of the next one. Understanding this framework doesn't make the experience less painful, but it does make it less personal. You weren't replaced because you were inadequate. You were replaced because she identified what she perceived as a better opportunity and executed a strategic transition plan. In the corporate world, the biggest salary increases don't come from internal promotions. They come from switching companies. Staying with the same employer typically yields annual raises of 3 to 5%, but changing employers can result in 20 to 50% increases in total compensation. Women have figured out that the same principle applies to relationships. The lifestyle improvements, emotional benefits, and social status upgrades they're seeking don't come from trying to negotiate better treatment within existing relationships. They come from leveraging current relationships to secure better relationships. Each partnership becomes a stepping stone to the next level rather than a destination in itself. This upgrade system explains why she might leave a perfectly functional relationship for something that appears only marginally better from your perspective. You're evaluating the trade-off based on current satisfaction levels. Is the new guy really that much better than me? She's evaluating it based on trajectory and potential. What can this new situation provide that my current situation never will? The system also explains why your attempts to improve the relationship after she's mentally checked out feel futile and frustrating. You're offering internal promotions when she's already negotiated an external offer. You're proposing 5% improvements when she's identified a 50% upgrade opportunity. Your retention efforts feel too little, too late, because they are too little, too late. The compensation upgrade system creates what I call relationship arbitrage, where women continuously scan the market for better deals while maintaining their current position. They're not actively trying to leave, they're passively open to opportunities that represent significant improvements over their current situation. This scanning behaviour is often invisible to their current partners because it doesn't involve obvious flirting or inappropriate behaviour. It involves strategic networking, maintaining connections and keeping options warm rather than hot. By the time you notice anything unusual, the arbitrage opportunity has already been identified and the transition plan is already in motion. The most sophisticated practitioners of this system maintain what economists call option positions, potential opportunities that can be exercised when the timing is right. These aren't backup plans or safety nets, they're strategic investments in future possibilities that can be activated when current arrangements become unsatisfactory. One of the most counterintuitive aspects of this dynamic is why women who transition quickly often choose men who appear less accomplished, less attractive, or less successful than their previous partners. This seems illogical until you understand the development investment theory that governs these decisions. Women recognize that men who have been in serious relationships possess what economists call human capital, that single men lack. They've been trained in relationship skills, emotional intelligence, and partnership dynamics that unmarried men haven't developed. They represent lower risk investments because their relationship competence has been proven and developed by previous partners. This creates a perverse incentive structure where the men who are most attractive to women seeking relationships are men who are already in relationships or recently out of them. The development work has already been done by someone else, reducing the time and energy required to train them into acceptable partners. The theory explains why she might choose someone who seems obviously inferior to you in measurable categories like income, education, or physical attractiveness. She's not evaluating based on static attributes, she's evaluating based on dynamic potential and the amount of additional development required to reach her standards. Your replacement might make less money than you, but if he's more emotionally available, more willing to commit, or more aligned with her long-term goals, he represents a better return on investment despite lower baseline metrics. She's buying potential plus proven relationship experience rather than just current performance. This development investment calculus also explains why men who have been trained by high-quality, previous relationships often find themselves more attractive to women than they were when they were single. They've been developed by someone else's investment, making them more valuable in the secondary market. The most frustrating aspect of this theory is how it punishes men who do the development work. You invest time, energy, and emotional labour in training someone to be a better partner, only to watch them take those improved skills to someone else who benefits from your investment without paying the development costs. Women who transition quickly between relationships are operating sophisticated risk management strategies that minimize their exposure to the uncertainties and vulnerabilities that come with being single. They're not jumping from man to man out of neediness or inability to be alone. They're maintaining continuous relationship coverage to avoid gaps in security, social status, and emotional support. This risk management approach treats being single as an unacceptable state of exposure rather than a natural phase of personal development. The costs and risks of singlehood, social isolation, financial uncertainty, biological clock pressure, dating market competition are too high to justify voluntary exposure when alternatives are available. The portfolio approach means maintaining multiple relationship options at various stages of development. Not cheating or emotional affairs, but strategic relationship building that ensures smooth transitions when current arrangements become unsatisfactory. She's managing a pipeline of potential opportunities rather than relying on random encounters when she needs alternatives. This risk management strategy explains why the timing of breakups often coincides with major life transitions, seasonal changes, or social events where being single would be particularly costly or uncomfortable. The transition happens when the cost of staying exceeds the risk of leaving, and when suitable alternatives have been identified and cultivated. The portfolio approach also explains why these transitions feel so calculated and emotionless from your perspective. She's not making impulsive decisions based on feelings. She's executing strategic plans based on risk-reward analysis. The emotional processing happens privately, often months before the actual breakup occurs. Understanding this risk management framework helps explain why your relationship felt stable right up until the moment it ended. She wasn't giving you warning signs of dissatisfaction because she wasn't dissatisfied enough to leave without alternatives. Once alternatives were secured, the dissatisfaction became actionable rather than just uncomfortable. One of the most sophisticated aspects of female relationship strategy is how current relationships provide negotiation leverage in securing better future relationships. A woman who is already partnered negotiates from a position of strength when exploring alternatives, while a single woman negotiates from a position of need. This leverage dynamic explains why women rarely break up first unless they're already confident about their next option. Having a current partner demonstrates social proof, removes desperation from their negotiating position, and allows them to be selective about alternatives rather than grateful for any opportunity. The leverage works because men value what other men value. A woman who is clearly desirable to her current partner is more attractive to potential partners than a woman who appears to be struggling to find or keep relationships. The competition creates scarcity psychology that increases her perceived value. This dynamic also explains why women often seem more attractive to other men when they're in relationships than when they're single. It's not just that they're more relaxed or confident, it's that they're unconsciously negotiating from a position of abundance rather than scarcity, which creates more appealing energy and interactions. The leverage principle means that the women who are most successful at upgrading relationships are those who are best at maintaining their current relationships while exploring alternatives. They're not burning bridges or creating drama, they're maintaining optionality while investigating better opportunities. Understanding this leverage dynamic helps explain why attempts to win her back after she's left often fail spectacularly. Once she's transitioned to a new relationship, your leverage has been completely eliminated while hers has been maximized. You're now negotiating from scarcity while she's operating from abundance. If you're starting to understand how strategic thinking rather than emotional instability drives these relationship transition patterns, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. The dynamics I'm explaining today represent a completely different way of understanding female relationship behavior, and there's much more depth to explore in upcoming videos about dating psychology, strategic thinking, and relationship market dynamics. Women operate under biological constraints that create urgency around relationship decisions in ways that men often don't fully comprehend. The fertility window, the social timeline expectations, and the competitive pressures of the dating market create time-sensitive decision-making that prioritizes efficiency over sentiment. This biological timeline pressure means that women can't afford to spend months or years processing breakups, taking breaks from dating, or gradually working through emotional issues while remaining single. Every month of relationship downtime represents opportunity costs that compound over time in ways that don't apply equally to men. The pressure creates what I call relationship efficiency optimization, where the goal becomes minimizing transition time between partners rather than maximizing recovery time between relationships. The focus shifts from healing from the past to positioning for the future, from processing what went wrong to securing what could go right. This timeline pressure explains why women often seem to have processed the emotional aspects of breakups before they actually occur. They've been psychologically preparing for the transition while still physically present in the relationship, allowing them to move forward quickly once the decision is made. The biological reality also means that each relationship is evaluated not just for current satisfaction, but for long-term potential within the constraints of biological timelines. A relationship that might be perfectly enjoyable for an indefinite period becomes unsatisfactory when viewed through the lens of limited reproductive years. Understanding this timeline pressure helps explain why women might seem cold or calculating during breakups. They're not necessarily lacking emotion, they're managing emotion within the context of strategic priorities that can't afford to be derailed by sentiment or nostalgia. Women have identified something that men often miss. Previous relationships don't just provide experience, they provide specific training that makes men more valuable as partners. The man who emerges from a serious relationship has been developed in ways that single men haven't, creating what economists call added value through the relationship experience. This training value recognition explains why recently divorced or separated men often find themselves more attractive to women than they were as lifelong bachelors. They've been through the relationship development process, learned partnership skills, and proven their ability to commit and function in long-term arrangements. The recognition creates what I call relationship resume building, where each partnership adds qualifications and experience that make men more attractive for future partnerships. Women are essentially hiring pre-trained talent rather than investing in developing raw recruits from the single population. This training value system explains why your ex-girlfriend's new partner might seem less accomplished than you in traditional metrics, but more appealing to her in relationship terms. He's been developed by previous partners in ways that make him immediately functional as a boyfriend, while maintaining the enthusiasm that comes with new relationships. The system also explains why women often seem to prefer men who have relationship experience over men who have been single for extended periods. Extended singlehood suggests either inability to maintain relationships or lack of development through relationship training programs. Understanding training value recognition helps explain why the end of your relationship benefits her next partner more than it benefits you. She's taking the relationship skills you helped develop and applying them to someone who didn't pay the development costs, while you're left to start over with whatever skills you gained from the experience. Every relationship follows a predictable loyalty life cycle, where initial enthusiasm gradually gives way to accumulated grievances, unmet expectations, and familiarity bred dissatisfaction. Women who master relationship transitions have learned to recognize this life cycle and time their exits for maximum strategic advantage. The life cycle typically begins with what I call the honeymoon optimization phase, where everything feels possible and both partners are operating at peak performance. This phase creates maximum loyalty and minimum complaints, making it the ideal time for establishing relationship norms and expectations. The middle phase involves maintenance mode, where the relationship becomes routine problems emerge and both partners begin taking each other for granted. This phase can last months or years, but it inevitably creates the conditions for either deeper commitment or strategic exit planning. The final phase is exit evaluation, where accumulated dissatisfaction reaches levels that make alternatives attractive and transition planning becomes active rather than passive. This phase often coincides with external opportunities that provide clear upgrade paths. Women who understand this life cycle don't wait for relationships to completely deteriorate before exploring alternatives. They recognize when the loyalty trajectory is pointing downward and begin positioning themselves for better opportunities while they still have leverage and options. Understanding the loyalty life cycle helps explain why your relationship might have seemed stable right up until it ended. She wasn't necessarily unhappy enough to leave, she was strategically aware enough to recognize when the trajectory was negative and alternatives were available. The seamless transitions between relationships require sophisticated deception management that maintains current relationships while developing future alternatives. This isn't necessarily conscious manipulation, it's strategic information management designed to minimize conflict while maximizing optionality. The deception framework operates through careful compartmentalization, where different aspects of her social and emotional life are kept separate to avoid premature revelation of transition plans. Current partners receive maintenance-level attention, while potential alternatives receive exploration-level attention. This framework explains why you might have felt like everything was fine while she was already emotionally investing in your replacement. The deception isn't designed to hurt you, it's designed to protect her strategic position until transition plans are finalized and ready for execution. The most sophisticated practitioners of this framework maintain what appears to be normal relationship behavior while conducting parallel relationship development activities. They're not cheating in traditional terms, but they're definitely not operating with complete transparency about their long-term intentions. Understanding the strategic deception framework helps explain why these transitions feel like betrayals even when no explicit cheating occurred. The betrayal is in the strategic planning and emotional investment that happened without your knowledge, not necessarily in physical infidelity. The framework also explains why confronting her about suspicious behavior often produces convincing denials that later prove to be technically true, but strategically misleading. She's managing information to maintain her position until she's ready to execute her transition plan. Women who maintain continuous relationships benefit from what marketers call positioning advantages that make them more attractive to potential partners than women who are obviously single and seeking relationships. The positioning creates psychological dynamics that work in their favour during the courtship process. The advantage operates through several psychological mechanisms. First, social proof suggests that if another man finds her valuable enough to commit to, she must possess qualities worth having. Second, scarcity psychology makes her seem more desirable because she's not readily available. Third, competition creates urgency among potential alternatives. This positioning advantage explains why married or committed women often receive more male attention than single women actively seeking relationships. The commitment status signals value while creating the psychological tension that drives male pursuit behaviour. The advantage also explains why women in relationships often seem more confident and attractive than the same women when they're single and dating. They're not performing or auditioning, they're operating from abundance, which creates more appealing energy and interactions. Understanding market positioning helps explain why your ex-girlfriend might have seemed more attractive to other men while she was with you than she does now that she's available. The positioning advantage has shifted from her favour to working against her, at least temporarily. The positioning principle also explains why women who transition quickly often choose timing that maximises their positioning advantages, ending relationships when they have clear alternatives rather than hoping alternatives will appear after they're single. The rapid transitions between relationships operate on emotional economics principles that prioritise resource conservation and opportunity maximisation over traditional relationship sentimentality. Women are managing limited emotional resources across multiple relationship opportunities in ways that optimise long-term outcomes. This emotional economics approach means that the energy spent processing breakups, grieving losses, and working through relationship endings is considered inefficient allocation of limited emotional resources. That energy is better invested in developing new opportunities than dwelling on expired arrangements. The economics also explain why women often seem emotionally detached during breakups, while becoming emotionally invested in new relationships. They've already allocated their emotional resources toward future opportunities rather than past arrangements, making the transition feel cold to their previous partners. Understanding emotional economics helps explain why traditional advice about taking time to heal between relationships often goes ignored by women who transition quickly. They're not avoiding emotional processing, they're managing it more efficiently by investing emotional energy in forward-looking rather than backward-looking activities. The economics principle also explains why attempts to rekindle relationships after they've ended typically fail. Once emotional resources have been reallocated to new opportunities, returning them to previous arrangements feels like poor resource management rather than romantic reconciliation. This emotional economics framework operates whether women are conscious of it or not. It's not necessarily calculated behaviour, it's intuitive resource management that prioritises long-term relationship success over short-term emotional comfort. What appears to be personal betrayal is actually systematic behaviour that follows predictable patterns based on strategic logic, biological constraints, and market dynamics. Understanding these patterns at the system level removes the personal sting while providing insight into relationship dynamics that affect most men. The system operates regardless of your individual qualities, relationship performance, or commitment level. Even excellent boyfriends get replaced when better opportunities arise and transition conditions are favourable. Your adequacy as a partner is less relevant than your position in her strategic planning process. Understanding the system level helps explain why improving your individual behaviour rarely prevents these transitions. You're not competing against your own performance standards, you're competing against alternative opportunities that offer different value propositions within her strategic framework. The system also explains why these patterns repeat across different women and different relationships. The underlying strategic logic remains consistent even when the individuals involved change, creating predictable behaviour patterns that transcend personal character or individual circumstances. System-level understanding also provides emotional protection by removing the need to analyse what you did wrong or how you could have prevented the transition. The transition was driven by systematic forces rather than individual failures, making prevention largely impossible through personal behaviour modification. Most importantly, system-level understanding allows you to approach future relationships with realistic expectations about loyalty, commitment, and the strategic nature of modern relationship dynamics. Understanding why women transition quickly between relationships allows men to develop strategic responses that protect their interests while maintaining realistic expectations about relationship permanence and loyalty. This framework isn't about becoming cynical, it's about becoming strategic. The framework begins with accepting that all relationships are potentially temporary arrangements that exist as long as they serve both parties' strategic interests. This acceptance allows you to invest appropriately without over-investing in arrangements that may not be permanent. Strategic response also involves maintaining your own optionality, rather than becoming completely dependent on any single relationship for social, emotional, or logistical support. The men who handle these transitions best are those who maintain independent lives that don't collapse when relationships end. The framework includes recognizing transition signals and responding appropriately rather than trying to prevent inevitable outcomes through increased investment or behavior modification. Sometimes the most strategic response is facilitating smooth transitions rather than fighting losing battles. Strategic response also means understanding that her transition to someone else reflects strategic thinking rather than personal inadequacy, allowing you to maintain self-respect and confidence rather than falling into self-blame and analysis paralysis. Most importantly, the strategic response framework allows you to appreciate relationships for what they provide while they last, without feeling devastated when they end according to predictable patterns rather than personal failures. If this analysis has helped you understand the strategic logic behind rapid relationship transitions and want to learn more about developing your own strategic approach to modern dating dynamics, subscribe to this channel for more insights into relationship psychology, strategic thinking, and dating market realities. Hit that notification bell because understanding these patterns could help you navigate modern relationships with better outcomes and less emotional damage. Share this video with any man who needs to understand that relationship transitions are often strategic decisions rather than personal rejections. The goal isn't to become cynical about women or relationships, but to understand the strategic frameworks that govern modern relationship behavior so you can respond appropriately rather than taking systematic behavior personally. When you understand the game being played, you can play it more effectively rather than being surprised by predictable outcomes. 46. Women who transition quickly aren't necessarily better or worse than women who don't. They're simply operating with different strategic frameworks and constraints that drive different behavioral patterns. Understanding these frameworks allows you to make better decisions about investment levels, relationship expectations, and strategic positioning within the modern dating landscape. The most successful men in modern dating are those who understand relationship strategy, maintain their own optionality, and respond to systematic behavior with systematic thinking rather than emotional reactivity. They don't take transitions personally because they understand the strategic logic that drives them, allowing them to maintain confidence and continue building valuable relationships without being derailed by predictable outcomes.